Hello everybody, welcome to my channel.
Jimmy Carter, Biography. Early life and education. James Earl Jimmy Carter Jr. was born on October 1, 1924, in Plains, Georgia, a small farming community that shaped much of his character and worldview. He grew up during the Great Depression, working on his family's peanut farm. Carter excelled academically and earned a place at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, graduating in 1946. He served as a naval officer in the submarine service, developing strong leadership and discipline. Entry into politics. After his father's death in 1953, Carter returned home to manage the family peanut business, eventually transforming it into a successful enterprise. His interest in public service led him to local politics, first as a member of the school board, then as a Georgia state senator, 1963 to 1967. Known for advocating racial integration and government transparency at a time when such positions were politically risky in the South, Carter gained a reputation as a reformer. In 1971, he became governor of Georgia. His tenure focused on modernizing state government, civil rights, and efficient administration. His inaugural address declared, "The time for racial discrimination is over," signaling a progressive stance that helped expand his national profile. 39th President of the United States, 1977 to 1981, Jimmy Carter won the 1976 presidential election and took office on January 20, 1977. Running as an outsider promising honesty, he emphasized human rights as a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy. Key achievements during his presidency include Camp David Accords, 1978, a landmark peace agreement between Egypt and Israel brokered by Carter, one of the most significant diplomatic successes in modern history. Panama Canal Treaties. Carter negotiated the transfer of control of the Panama Canal to Panama, improving long-term relations with Latin America. Energy policy. Faced with an energy crisis, he pushed for conservation, renewable energy research, and the creation of the Department of Energy. Challenges during his presidency included high inflation, unemployment, and the 1979 Iran hostage crisis, which overshadowed his accomplishments and contributed to his loss to Ronald Reagan in the 1980 election. Post-presidency and humanitarian work. After leaving office, Carter redefined what a former president could be. He founded the Carter Center in 1982, focusing on human rights, diplomacy, election monitoring, and global health initiatives. The center has played a major role in reducing diseases such as guinea worm and supporting peaceful election processes around the world. Carter became known for hands-on service, frequently working with Habitat for Humanity, physically helping build homes for those in need. In 2002, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his decades of humanitarian and diplomatic efforts. Personal life. Jimmy Carter married Rosalind Smith in 1946, and they remained partners in life, politics, and service for over 77 years until her passing in 2023. They raised 4 children. Carter has written numerous books covering topics from politics and peace to personal reflections and poetry. Legacy. Jimmy Carter is remembered not only for his presidency but even more for his extraordinary post-presidential life, marked by compassion, humility, and a relentless devotion to peace and human dignity. He remains a symbol of moral leadership, proving that public service can continue long after leaving office. Early life, background, and values. Jimmy Carter was born into a modest farming family in Plains, Georgia, a rural town with only a few hundred residents. His father was a businessman and farmer. while his mother, Lillian Carter, was a nurse known for her compassion, traits that influenced Carter's view of service and humanity. Growing up during the Great Depression shaped his understanding of poverty and community resilience. Although his family was relatively stable financially compared to others in the region, Carter worked from a young age, learning responsibility and thrift. A bright student with a fascination for machinery and engineering, Carter was the first in his family to attend college. He initially enrolled at Georgia Southwestern College and Georgia Tech before being accepted into the U.S. Naval Academy, one of the most prestigious military institutions in the United States. Military career, 1946 to 1953. Carter's naval career was an essential part of his identity. He served on advanced submarines during the early years of the Cold War and became part of the Navy's emerging nuclear submarine program. Working under Admiral Hyman Rickover, a demanding leader who left a lifelong impression on Carter's work ethic and expectations for excellence. His naval experience taught precise problem-solving, strategic thinking under pressure, a leadership style based on calm, careful decision-making. Carter later credited his time in the Navy as some of the most formative years of his life. Return to Georgia and rise in politics. Carter returned to Plains after his father's death in 1953 to run the family peanut business. Despite challenges, including periods of financial struggle, he turned the business into a profitable operation through discipline and smart management. He became increasingly involved in community affairs, serving on the local school board in the Georgia State Senate, 1963 to 1967. Where he fought corruption and advocated transparency. Carter gained attention for refusing to adopt segregationist rhetoric during a time when many Southern politicians used racial fear to win votes. Although he initially struggled politically because of this, his integrity later became a hallmark of his national appeal. Governor of Georgia, 1971 to 1975, as governor, Carter modernized state government and took bold, progressive stances on civil rights. His inaugural address included the powerful declaration, "The time for racial discrimination is over." Key achievements: overhauled state government structure for efficiency, focused on education and rural development, promoted environmental conservation. This period helped establish Carter as a forward-thinking and morally driven leader, setting the stage for his presidential campaign. Presidency of the United States, 1977 to 1981. Carter entered the White House as a Washington outsider, promising honesty and trust after the Watergate scandal damaged public confidence in government. Major domestic initiatives established the Department of Energy and Department of Education, advanced environmental protection, protecting more land in Alaska than any president in U.S. history at that point. Installed solar panels on the White House, symbolizing renewable energy commitment. He urged Americans to conserve energy and reduce dependence on foreign oil, ideas that were initially unpopular but have since proven prescient. Foreign policy philosophy. Carter believed the United States should use its global influence to promote human rights. This approach led to reduced U.S. support for dictatorship that violated human rights, increased humanitarian diplomacy. Camp David Accords, 1978. Perhaps his greatest presidential achievement was negotiating peace between Egypt and Israel, a breakthrough that endured and earned Carter world respect. Challenges: economic issues, inflation, rising oil prices, and unemployment. The Iran hostage crisis, 1979 to 1981. Where 52 Americans were held hostage for 444 days, severely impacted his presidency and public perception post-presidency. A life devoted to service after leaving office, Carter became one of the most active and impactful former presidents in history. The Carter Center, founded 1982, a nonprofit devoted to Conflict Mediation Global Health Election Monitoring Human Rights Global Health Impact. The Carter Center helped reduce cases of guinea worm disease from millions to almost zero, one of the greatest public health achievements in history without a vaccine. Election Monitoring Carter personally observed elections in more than 100 countries, supporting fair democratic processes worldwide. Habitat for Humanity Carter and his wife Rosalind swung hammers and built homes themselves, a hands-on symbol of humility and service. Nobel Peace Prize 2002, awarded for his lifelong commitment to human rights, diplomacy, and humanitarian work. Personal life and character. Jimmy and Rosalind Carter married in 1946 and built a partnership that lasted over 77 years, one of the longest presidential marriages in American history. They were equal partners in public service, philanthropy, and family life. Carter wrote more than 30 books, memoirs, poetry, reflections on faith, and even novels, reflecting a curious and introspective personality. Despite his achievements, Carter always returned to Plains, living in a modest house and teaching Sunday school into his 90s. Legacy. Jimmy Carter's legacy grows stronger over time. He is remembered not only as a president but as a humanitarian who lived with purpose and integrity. His post-presidential work transformed millions of lives and reshaped expectations for how former leaders can serve the world. Jimmy Carter showed that the highest form of leadership is service. Detailed expansion of Jimmy Carter's life and legacy. Star childhood, family background, and moral anchor. Jimmy Carter grew up in a tight-knit, deeply religious Southern Baptist family. His mother, Lillian Carter, was known in the community for treating both white and black patients with equal dignity, a radical act in a segregated era. From her, Carter absorbed his sense of empathy, tolerance, and global citizenship. Carter's values were shaped by rural, agrarian life, working sunrise to sunset on a peanut farm. A stern, disciplined father who expected precision and responsibility. A socially progressive mother who valued service to others. He once said his most enduring lessons came not from politics but from church, farming, and family duty. Star naval career, discipline, innovation, and leadership. In the Navy, Carter served under Admiral Hyman Rickover, the father of the nuclear navy. Rickover's intense leadership style influenced Carter. Rickover's question, always, was, "Did you do your best?" Carter learned accountability without excuses. Calm under extreme pressure. Analysis before action. He worked on early nuclear propulsion technology, which honed his problem-solving skills at a level few presidents ever experienced. Star early political career, courage during civil rights era. Carter entered public life during a time when Southern politics was dominated by segregation. He refused to support racist policies, even when doing so cost him votes. He lost his first race for governor in 1966 because he refused to run on a segregationist platform. Instead of changing his values, he doubled down on integrity and transparency. By the time he won the governorship in 1971, he was ready to govern with moral clarity. His declaration, "The time for racial discrimination is over," stunned the political establishment. Star presidential campaign, 1976. Following Watergate, the country was desperate for honesty. Carter campaigned as a Washington outsider, a moral reformer, a listener to the American people. His campaign strategy was groundbreaking. He traveled to small towns no candidate had visited in decades. He shook hands with voters personally, sometimes hundreds per day. He famously said, "I'll never lie to you." Carter won because he represented decency at a time when trust in government was shattered. Star presidency, 1977 to 1981, achievements, vision. and struggles. Carter's presidency was rooted in long-term thinking, even when politically risky. Checkmark foreign policy achievements. Camp David Accords, peace between Egypt and Israel, 1978. Carter personally negotiated for 13 days at Camp David. The result, a peace treaty that stopped decades of war. Human rights doctrine. Carter cut U.S. support to regimes that tortured citizens, including Argentina's military junta, South African apartheid government. He prioritized moral diplomacy over Cold War gamesmanship. Panama Canal treaties. Carter signed agreements guaranteeing the canal would return to Panama, improving U.S.-Latin American relations. Diplomatic recognition of China, 1979, opened an economic and geopolitical relationship that changed global trade. Checkmark domestic achievements. Created the Department of Energy and Department of Education. Passed laws promoting renewable energy and conservation. Protected more than 100 million acres of Alaskan land. Appointed more women and minorities to federal positions than any previous president. Carter was one of the first leaders to warn about climate change, oil dependency, and the need for sustainable energy. In 1979, he installed solar panels on the White House, decades before environmentalism became mainstream. Warning challenges and criticism. Carter's presidency was overshadowed by events he could not fully control. Double-digit inflation, ongoing energy crisis, Iran hostage crisis, 1979 to 1981. Carter refused to use force recklessly to free the hostages. Instead, he pursued diplomacy, a contrast to future administrations. Although his diplomatic approach was moral and patient, it hurt him politically. The hostages were released on the day Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. Star post-presidency, reinvention and global impact. Carter reinvented what it means to be a former president. Blue Square. The Carter Center, 1982-present. The center focuses on ending conflicts peacefully, fighting preventable diseases, promoting democracy and fair elections. Most extraordinary achievement: help reduce guinea worm disease from millions of cases to almost zero, without any vaccine. Purple Square. Habitat for Humanity. Carter didn't merely donate, he picked up a hammer and helped build houses around the world well into his 90s. Green Square. Nobel Peace Prize, 2002, awarded for decades of untiring effort to find peaceful solutions to international conflicts. Star personal traits. Carter is remembered for humility. He lived in a modest house in Plains, Georgia. Integrity. He refused corporate boards after leaving office. Lifelong commitment to service. He taught Sunday school into his 90s, even while experiencing health issues. Star legacy. Many historians now view Carter as the most successful former president in American history. His legacy is defined not by power, but by humanity. He showed the world that leadership is not about being in the spotlight, it's about making lives better when no one is watching. Detailed timeline of Jimmy Carter's life and career. 1924, birth, born October 1, 1924, in Plains, Georgia. 1930s, Great Depression upbringing, worked on family peanut farm. Learned frugality, hard work, and community support. 1943 to 1946, U.S. Naval Academy, studied engineering. Graduated in the top portion of his class. 1946, marriage, married Rosalind Smith, his childhood friend. Their partnership becomes a cornerstone of his personal and public life. 1946 to 1953, naval officer, served on Atlantic and Pacific fleets. Selected for nuclear submarine program under Admiral Rickover. 1953, returns home, father dies. Carter leaves Navy to run family farm. 1963 to 1967, Georgia State Senate, builds reputation for honesty and reform. exposes corruption in voter registration practices. 1971 to 1975, Governor of Georgia modernizes government structure. Advances civil rights, environmental reform. 1976, elected 39th President of the United States, wins as a political outsider on a platform of integrity. 1977, takes office, immediately focuses on ethics, transparency, and human rights. 1978, Camp David Accords achieves peace between Egypt and Israel. 1979, normalizes diplomatic ties with China. Energy crisis hits, inflation rises. Iran hostage crisis begins in November. 1980, election loses re-election to Ronald Reagan. 1982, establishes the Carter Center, focus on diplomacy, democracy, disease eradication. 1984, begins major work with Habitat for Humanity, becomes the global face of the organization. 2002, wins Nobel Peace Prize, recognized for decades of peace and humanitarian work. 2023, Rosalynn Carter passes away after 77 years of marriage. 2024, Jimmy Carter turns 100 years old, oldest living former U.S. president. Globe Human Rights as a foreign policy doctrine. Carter did something almost unheard of at the time. He put human rights above geopolitical convenience. While other administrations tolerated or supported authoritarian allies, Carter made human rights a condition for U.S. cooperation. He cut support to the Argentine junta, responsible for the dirty war, disappearances, South Africa under apartheid dictatorship in Latin America and Asia. This frustrated some Cold War strategists, who preferred supporting any regime that opposed the Soviet Union. But Carter believed America should be the champion of the weak, not the ally of the oppressor. This was decades ahead of its time, a model later adopted by future leaders. Dubbed the Camp David Accords, inside the negotiation for 13 days in September 1978. Carter lived at Camp David with Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin. Both men were fierce adversaries. Diplomats said peace was impossible. Carter refused to give up. He met with each leader individually, walking wooded trails late at night, listening to fears, not just demands. He used empathy, not pressure. He famously had photographs of Sadat's grandchildren and Begin's grandchildren printed, signing them as gifts with a personal message: for the sake of your grandchildren, please choose peace. Begin broke down. On September 17, 1978, the Camp David Accords were signed, the first peace agreement between Israel and an Arab nation. The peace has lasted more than 40 years. Hammer and wrench. Carter's post-presidency work, a second life of service. Many presidents retire into comfort. Jimmy Carter went back to manual labor, building homes with Habitat for Humanity, hammer in hand, for decades. At 85 years old, he was still climbing scaffolding. At 90 plus, he still swung a hammer. He said, "I have one life, one chance to make it useful, and I'm going to try." Hospital disease eradication. The Carter Center targeted diseases that afflicted the world's poorest, including guinea worm disease, river blindness, trachoma, malaria. Research and eradication strategy. Guinea worm disease went from 3.5 million cases per year to almost zero. One of the greatest feats in public health history, without a vaccine. Ballot box with ballot election monitoring and global democracy. Carter personally observed elections in over 100 countries, protecting transparency and fair democratic processes. His presence helped prevent fraud and violence. A president who once commanded the U.S. military later stood in dusty polling stations in remote villages, making sure every vote counted. Writing handwriting and intellectual life. Carter is the most prolific presidential author in U.S. history, writing more than 30 books, including autobiographies, poetry, Bible reflections, books on peace negotiation, a children's book. He remained curious, reflective, and always learning. Compass leadership style and personality. Carter believed that listening was a form of leadership. Traits that defined him: empathy over ego, service over power, humility over fame. He once said, "My faith demands that I do whatever I can, wherever I am, whenever I can, for as long as I can, with whatever I have." He lived that. Classical building. How historians view him. Historians now widely agree. As president, undervalued, sometimes misunderstood as former president. One of the greatest public servants in modern history, Carter proved that the meaning of a life in public service can expand after leaving office. Glowing star. Overall legacy. Jimmy Carter is remembered not for how much power he wielded, but for how much good he did when he no longer had power. He lived a life defined by compassion, moral conviction, unshakable belief in human dignity. We are all neighbors, even if we've never met. That was his worldview, and his gift to history. United States section. Iran hostage crisis.
Bye bye. Thanks for watching. Bye.